At issue this Sunday, State Auditor Diana DiZoglio. She's long advocated for auditing the state legislature and now wants voters to weigh in this November. We'll ask about her fight against some powerful opponents.
And as Massachusetts celebrates Pride Month, former Supreme Judicial Court Chief Justice Margaret Marshall reflects on her ruling on same-sex marriage that changed the country. At issue starts now.
And thanks for joining us for another edition of At Issue. I'm Matt Pritchard in for Corey Smith.
And I'm Sue O'Connell. Coming up, someone who wants to shake up the Massachusetts legislature. State Auditor Diana DiZoglio is here.
But before we move forward, a look back at what was at issue this past week.
Well, the first witness has been called to the stand in Hunter Biden's firearms trial. The president's son has pleaded not guilty to 3 charges tied to possession of a gun while using narcotics.
Former Trump aide Steve Bannon has been ordered to report to prison on July 1st. Bannon was found guilty on 2 counts of contempt of Congress in 2022.
The House passed the Affordable Housing Act, set to push billions of dollars to incentivizing housing construction in Massachusetts.
City officials in Quincy have voted to give the mayor a hefty pay raise. Now, we want to give you some perspective here. New York City's mayor, Eric Adams' current salary is $258,000. Boston Mayor Michelle Wu's salary is $207,000. Well, now, Quincy's mayor, Thomas Koch, will have a salary of $285,000.
Also last week, President Biden's executive action on the southern border. It's a policy that has divided Democrats here in Massachusetts.
Yeah, that's right. Republicans have argued for years that the president has taken no action at the border, even though they killed a bipartisan compromise border deal earlier this year. Now, as for the executive action, it bars migrants who cross the border illegally from requesting asylum when illegal crossings are over 2,500 per day, which they have been for the past 3 years or so. Those restrictions last until crossings dip below 1,500 per day.
Now, there are exceptions to the restrictions. Migrants can still request asylum at ports of entry.
Now, with this move, the president is looking to turn the tables on Republicans in regards to a politically fraught issue. A recent NBC News poll shows just 28% of Americans approve of President Biden's handling of the border. Nearly 10 million migrants have crossed into the United States since he took office.
Frankly, I would have preferred to address this issue through bipartisan legislation, because that's the only way to actually get the kind of system we have now that's broken, fixed, to hire more Border Patrol agents, more asylum officers, more judges. But Republicans have left me no choice.
Now, back in 2018, the Trump administration tried to enact similar border restrictions, but courts blocked them. Now, Governor Maura Healey says she strongly supports this move. Her administration has been working to find housing for migrants arriving here, but Senator Ed Markey urged the president to change course, and Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley said that Biden should not be unearthing policies of the Trump administration. Sue, what do you take on all of this?
Listen, Biden is in the same box that presidents have been in the past, which is he needs Congress to act, to make changes, to change our immigration system, which Congress has not done, not just this past one, but for decades. And of course, Biden has an election. As we know, he's running for president. So I think there's a calculated risk here. If we look at the swing states and we look at where Joe Biden might be weak and losing some people, you know, we've had some, his campaign has concerns about the pro-Palestinian folks in Michigan. He's having some challenges with black male voters and some Latino voters. Is this small move, which I know there are real people impacted here, I don't want to diminish it, but if this small technical move allows him to pick up some of the undecided voters, the unenrolled voters, maybe the Nikki Haley voters, it might help him in some of those swing states. So we'll have to see. It's a calculated risk versus benefit analysis. Again, it's not a big move. It's not going to change the needle very much on immigration, but it also does point back to Congress, that Congress is the place where things have to change.
An issue we're going to be watching all the way through to November. Sue, thanks for your thoughts. We're pivoting now, though, over to back here in Massachusetts. We don't know for certain until next month which ballot questions are going to appear on the Massachusetts ballot this coming November. One question that we could see would give the state auditors the authority to conduct an audit of the state legislature. Joining us to talk a little bit more about this issue and much more is Massachusetts Auditor Diana DiZoglio. Thanks so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be back.
Great to see you. All right, so you've been fighting this fight for a while. What's the status? How many signatures have you collected, and will this question be on the ballot in November?
So we have several thousand raw signatures, is what we call them, signatures that we've gathered from grocery stores, cookouts, any type of event we can gather signatures at, that we have been turning into clerks. We don't have a full count on how many of those have counted yet. So we really are, going to be making that final push known to advocates, volunteers, and all residents who want to help to collect signatures over the course of the next couple of weeks, because we do have that hard stop deadline, which is June 18th, to get all of those signatures back to city and town clerk's offices. We need just about 13,000 certified signatures in order to make sure that this audit of the legislature question will be on the November ballot. So anybody who wants to help with that, please visit my website, dianaforma.com, click on the ballot button, and find a way to get involved.
What are people saying to you? What are people, when you're asking them for their signature, if they actually ask what it's for, what are they saying?
Well, most people actually, which was surprising to me, when I have been personally sitting out at grocery stores around the Commonwealth, people have come up. A lot of folks already know about this issue being an issue because they can't believe that the legislature isn't already audited by our office. And I understand why, Sue, and it's because the legislature actually always was historically audited by the Office of State Auditor, contrary to what most of us thought. And most of us thought that it wasn't audited by the State Auditor's Office previously because records were kept behind closed doors. They weren't made public. They weren't digitized. They were in things we call books that were on some dusty old shelves, right? And what I did when I got elected was I asked my staff to please pull out those dusty old books, look through them, find out how many times the legislature has been audited before, setting precedent. And actually, it was audited, we can find a minimum at least 117 times throughout history since the inception of the auditor's office back in 1849. Only in recent years has this denial of an audit been the case, where folks have started to say, we don't want you to audit us, we're above the law, we make our own rules. That's unacceptable. We need a transparent, accountable, and equitable state legislature, and that's what the State Auditor's Office is there to do. It's there to make sure we're opening up the doors, letting the sunshine in, and helping to make government work better and helping our state legislature to be more accessible to the taxpayers it's meant to serve. We know we have one of the least transparent state legislatures in the entire nation, not subject to public records laws, not subject to open meeting laws. We need to do better in Massachusetts, and this is one way that we can do that.
You hinted at it a little bit there that you've seen some pushback from the leadership up there on Beacon Hill. Earlier this year, we had Senate President Karen Spilka on our air who said that she felt like this was redundant, that they already do this. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
We get audited every year already. She fails to mention that fact, and it is a fact. We get audited by a certified public accountant company that is done governmental auditing, and we do that every year, and as soon as that audit is completed, Senate puts it on our website.
To the Senate President's office there, the website, and saw that this is the audit they're talking about. Is the effort to audit that they're talking about here, is that sufficient, or does more need to be done? And how do you respond to what she had to say?
Well, the Senate President has a right to her opinions. However, the law is clear that we are required to audit all state entities at least once every 3 years. State departments, to be clear, the legislature is a department of the Commonwealth, and every department and state entity has a right to solicit and procure an audit from a private entity and to engage with an auditing firm if they so choose to take a look at their books at what they ask them to take a look at. But what I just said there is really important. That audit that we hear about being conducted is one that is conducted based on what leadership in the House of Representatives and Senate ask them to look at. It's very limited. It's only a few pages long. It doesn't have accompanying receipts. The procurement process around how that audit even occurred is not transparent. We can't see any procurement documents. We don't know how that decision was made. And, it's not as detailed as it needs to be. So our office goes in. We recently did an audit of a couple of UMass's recently. And what we did was we looked at expenditures that were claimed by UMass Dartmouth and UMass Lowell in particular, expenditures that were claimed, and how that was to be reconciled with actual receipts that were kept to make sure that there weren't any discrepancies. We're not able to do that in cases like this. Furthermore, our office does what's called performance audits, where we look at processes and procedures. That's what the law says we're supposed to do. So we're not just limited just to listing, a couple of big numbers and saying, here are a couple of numbers. We actually are required by law to follow government auditing standards that require an audit of those processes, those procedures, so that we can get a breakdown of how things are occurring in our state legislature. And again, we do this of every state entity. It's not any different than what we do with other state entities. And with all due respect, if there's nothing to hide, why not just participate and cooperate with the auditor's office in the spirit of transparency to instill public trust across our communities?
Let's shift to Uber and the rideshare companies. You have a report your office has done on the rideshare companies. Some drivers, they don't want to unionize for better working environments, but the companies want to also keep them as independent contractors. Some want to unionize. You found that the state, a report that you did, found that the state is missing out on millions because drivers aren't treated as full employees. How are we missing out on that money? What did your report say?
So we did conduct a report, and I want to thank Senator Lydia Edwards for actually bringing this to our office. She's been very concerned about this and sponsored legislation at the State House to address some of these challenges. Our report actually found that an estimated, conservative estimate, I might say, $266 million is missing from state revenues from these transportation network companies who are misclassifying their employees as independent contractors. Our state's attorney general is suing these companies for the misclassification of their workers. What does that mean, though? Why is that important to taxpayers in Massachusetts? It's important to taxpayers in Massachusetts because we all pay into social programs, social welfare programs, our small businesses, our business community, our employers. They're paying into unemployment insurance, workman's comp. They're paying into paid family and medical leave so that these employees have services that they may need should anything occur and they go without work. Remember the pandemic shutdown period where that was a lot of people, right? And when these corporations are misclassifying their employees and not paying into the system their fair share, what that means is that burden is then put on other businesses who are following the law and classifying their employees correctly. But it also goes beyond that and hurts workers because they don't have access to services that they potentially may need. And it also hurts all the tax-paying residents of the Commonwealth who then need to pick up the slack. And we know that we need funding in the state of Massachusetts for important priorities. Making sure that we're holding these corporations accountable is imperative to make sure that we can get them to pay their fair share into the Massachusetts tax, or I shouldn't say tax, but Massachusetts budget, the same way everybody else does.
The other side of the issue, though, those that think that drivers should remain as independent contractors have called this study politically motivated. They said it's wildly flawed. How do you respond, I guess, to that criticism?
Oh, yeah, that criticism comes from a well-paid consultant who works for the transportation network companies who are being sued by our state's attorney general right now for misclassifying their employees. So certainly we expect that type of pushback from people who are being held accountable right now, but that accountability is going to continue. Our office is not going to be intimidated or bullied into saying that what they're doing is okay when it's absolutely not. It's actually completely unacceptable.
Your office also launched an investigation into the use of NDAs and settlements by state agencies and quasi-state government agencies like Massport. You yourself had agreed to an NDA after a brutal experience that you had as a State House aide. We talked about it when you were running for your first office and before that happened, before you were elected to office. Last weekend, you tweeted, quote, slamming Trump over NDA hush money as elected Massachusetts Democrats show a symbol of a megaphone, standing up to your own party leadership's silence on or blatant support of taxpayer-funded hush money NDAs to protect powerful perpetrators of sex harassment and abuse in state agencies with a picture of crickets. What don't people understand about the DNAs and the use of them in our state governments? And aren't they sometimes used for good to protect people who sign them?
Potentially, but I would say, Sue, that NDAs have absolutely been abused, and legislative leaders and others are refusing to have a conversation about how they are being abused, because a lot of people in power continue to benefit from their abuse. Right now in the state of Massachusetts, taxpayer dollars, the money that is coming out of everybody's paychecks, the money that you're paying into the system, that is able to be abused to cover up harassment, discrimination, abuse, and even potential corruption in state government right now through the use of non-disclosure agreements, which prevent state workers from being able to talk about the things that they have seen, witnessed, experienced across the board in our state agencies. It's happened in our own state legislature. And yes, years ago, I did raise my hand and say, hey, when I was a younger woman working in the state legislature as a legislative aide in the House of Representatives, I was sexually harassed, and they refused to release my severance package of 6 weeks out of about a $30,000 a year salary unless I signed away my right to talk about what happened. They were holding my small severance package hostage because they didn't want me to tell people about what I had seen and witnessed behind those closed doors up on Beacon Hill among some of the most powerful politicians in Massachusetts. That's still allowed to occur today. And we see this happening at the federal level in these conversations that are being had and what people think about hush money and private dollars being used and abused to do things that are unethical and illegal. And a lot of people don't know that our tax dollars right here in Massachusetts are able to go towards funding those same types of things with little to no accountability and oversight. So yes, my office is conducting an audit of various state agencies and entities across the Commonwealth to shine a light on how we are dealing with these non-disclosure agreements, how we are dealing with these, hush money factors, and if there are protocols, if there are procedures, what are those protocols? How are folks getting away with potentially abusing the system and your tax dollars? And I'm hoping that this report will shine a light on ways that we can do better.
I wanted to hit one last topic before we let you go, and it's on an idea that was floated by Transportation Secretary Monica Tibbetts-Nutt about putting tolls at the borders into Massachusetts, whatever state it might be that people are coming from. You tweeted out that you felt like this might create sort of a border war among these different states going on. You've been very active on Twitter. You've been bringing up your feelings on a lot of different things. Is that normal for a state auditor to be doing? Do you have ambitions for bigger things? And what do you think about this particular issue?
I can't comment to what's normal or not normal for state auditors across the board, but I can say, yes, I have been known to be pretty candid in my feelings about different things. I was born and raised in the Merrimack Valley. I was a state rep for 6 years, a state senator for 4. During those 10 years of public service in the legislature, I often talked about how a toll on the border would hurt our communities, creating infrastructural burdens on the back roads, but also just the issue of low income or working class families, middle income families, people that have to get to work, that are already having a hard time in making sure they're paying for that insurance on their vehicle, the excise tax, the cost of the vehicle, the cost of gas, getting back and forth to work. A lot of people who don't live in border communities might think that when you go back and forth across the border, it's just for the vacation and it's only going to be a toll on the out-of-state residents that are coming in. But those of us who have lived on the border, we know that there is a sort of synergy that goes on regarding, economic development. There's a synergy in business. There's a synergy just between our local communities. People go across the border from Methuen to Salem, New Hampshire all the time, from Haverhill to Plastow all the time, and they're working right across the border, visiting family who lives right across the border. We're talking just a street over, or maybe 2. So, I appreciate the conversation being had about ways to generate revenue because we need to have it. And, I appreciate the invitation to have a tough conversation because it is a tough conversation. And it is my opinion that that would be something that, would not be in the best interest of working families in those regions in particular. It would disproportionately negatively impact them. But I do think that we do need to continue to have conversations about generating revenue for our transportation system. And, you know, I commend those who have been part of that conversation.
Well, we appreciate you walking through all these topics with us. Thanks so much.
Sure thing. Yeah, thanks for having me.
Appreciate it. Well, up next, the court ruling that changed Massachusetts and the country forever 20 years after it took effect.
I knew that there was some interest. I had no idea that it would have the kind of national ramifications.
My interview with former Supreme Judicial Court Chief Justice Margaret Marshall on same-sex marriage and talking more about the Supreme Court possibly revisiting the issue. That's next.
Massachusetts is celebrating LGBTQ plus pride all month long. Yesterday, the Boston Pride Parade for the People marched through Boston.
Yeah, 20 years ago, same-sex marriage became legal in the Commonwealth, the first in the country to grant marriage equality. I recently sat down with former Chief Justice of the Supreme Judicial Court, Margaret Marshall, to look back on that decision.
And
in a career spanning decades,
I wrote many hundreds of decisions. But there's always one decision that comes up every 20 years.
One case has stood the test of time. Former Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court Chief Justice Margaret Marshall looking back at the Goodrich case of 2003 and the opinion she authored that legalized same-sex marriage in the Commonwealth.
The question was, under that Constitution, if the state, if the Commonwealth of Massachusetts was providing these really quite significant benefits, but also protections, and responsibilities to one set of people, couples, could they deny it to another?
So when you had finished writing the opinion then, I mean, were you aware of just, you know, the historic nature of it?
No.
What it was going to bring?
No, not at all, not at all. I knew that there was some interest. I had no idea that it would have the kind of national ramifications, let alone international ramifications.
Do you put it on your Mount Rushmore of decisions?
I hope not. Yeah. Which is to say, you know, one of the extraordinary things is on the day of argument, our courtroom at the Supreme Judicial Court was packed. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the courtroom is packed, sometimes the courtroom is not packed. Sometimes I would walk onto the bench and I wouldn't know why the courtroom was packed. I'd read all the cases and I'd wonder, did I miss something today? Was there something here? And you never know. After the arguments, most of the people in the courtroom left, but not all. There were 2 or 3 other cases to be argued that day. And for the people who remained in the courtroom, their case was the most important case to them in their lives. And if you're a justice, you close one set of briefs, you open the next set of briefs, you invite counsel to oral argument, and then you're just focused.
What criticism do you remember start to sort of come your way, or that you started to notice, and when did it start to bubble up?
Oh, very quickly. Wow. Very quickly. The next day, the next weeks, was a very difficult time. Both criticism and respect for the decision. It's just part of my job. I've been criticized for many decisions, probably none as vehemently as this. On the other hand, even today, 20 years later, people will come up to me and thank me. My answer is the same. It's not me, it's the Constitution.
So you don't really see yourself as a hero of the LGBTQ movement?
Not at all. I really don't.
Instead, Justice Marshall calls Goodrich just one piece of an overall government response, judiciary going first, giving way to legislative and executive steps that have followed.
From my point of view, it was all 3 branches eventually responding to the people to permit same-sex marriage in Massachusetts.
When we look at Supreme Court justices at the federal level floating the idea of taking another look at same-sex marriage, I mean, what do you think about that when you hear that come up?
Let me pick up on your phrase, floating the idea. Judges shouldn't be floating ideas. And the case in which Justice Thomas, the senior associate justice, made a comment in writing a concurring opinion in a case that had nothing to do with same-sex marriage, that he thought that same-sex marriage and presumably some other things should be reviewed. To me, that is a lack of judicial restraint.
Just a substantive conversation from start to
Great
finish.
interview. Good
No
job.
doubt about it. Thank you. Well, that's it for this edition of At Issue. Join us next Sunday as we turn our focus to Cape Cod, as so many of us do during the summertime. We'll look at what's at issue on the Cape, from transportation to infrastructure to housing. Thanks for joining us. I'm Matt Pritchard.
And I'm Sue O'Connell. Enjoy your day.